Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone. My name is Steve Russell. I'm a program manager with ASU's Sustainable Cities Network. We're a unit of the new Global Futures Laboratory here at ASU. Very briefly, SCN's Project Cities program facilitates class and independent student projects with local community stakeholders through the EPIC community partnership model. In my role, I work with faculty and administrators from across the university to coordinate amazing, enriched learning experiences through applied learning projects that provide a mutual benefit to our partners. We do this through partnerships with staff at our partnering municipal agencies, working with a variety of departments and frontline managerial and directorate level staff throughout the community. In line with Social Embeddedness Network's conference focus on sustainable development goals, today we are excited to talk about our first steps in measuring our program's impact in terms of the UN's SDGs. We've convened a great collection of collaborators today, really representing all parts of our partnership model for a series of brief discussions on our varied efforts to incorporate those SDGs into our work. So I'll start us off with a program level view. I'll then introduce Dr. Greg Broberg with the School of Social Transformation to discuss a class project that he coordinated last semester and the SDG reflection module that he introduced. Next, Marshall Curry with EPIC will preview a scaled up tracker, some comments on methods and some plans for future implementation. And finally, I'll introduce our community partners, Jay Davies with the City of Peoria and Tracie Hlvanika with the Town of Clarkdale, who will both discuss their efforts over the course of this partnership and beyond to incorporate the SDGs and sustainability more broadly into their strategic planning efforts. Now, if you're not familiar with the SDGs, I'm sorry we won't go too deep on that today, but at the basic level, the SDG goals were adopted by all UN member states in the 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And as you can see, there are 17 global goals for sustainable development, which presents a holistic framework for sustainability programs and initiatives, especially for those programs using the University Community Partnership Model. Communities are already working in many of these areas, and even if they don't explicitly call their programs sustainability programs or recognize some of their ongoing efforts as sustainability driven, many cities and town governments are already working toward or even actively tracking their progress on specific SDG indicators and targets. They might just not realize it yet, so there's an opportunity to make the connection and make some really cool things happen here. Since its adoption, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, an international NGO coordinating with UN and other international partners, leads the effort to implement those SDGs through education, research, policy analysis, and global cooperation. As a part of this, they also provide SDG index reports. Generally speaking, the US is a bit behind other developed nations in the world working on SDGs. Currently, the SDR gives us a score of 76.4, ranked 31st in the world. You can check the links at the bottom of this page to check out that index dashboard. It's really fascinating, and I highly encourage everyone to check out the SDSN and review those SDI reports to learn more. But there is a huge opportunity here because a lot of the problem is a data hole issue. So there are holes in the national and regional data, and the university community partnerships have the opportunity to fill in some of those gaps. So I encourage everyone again to check out the SDI, the SDSN to learn more about it. But I should add that the university's role is not just data here, because we need to be preparing our future leaders to carry the torch on sustainable development. So our goal here now today is not to have the final solution, but to begin a conversation, to tell our story, and to help municipalities and students to engage in the SDGs in new, meaningful, and exciting ways. Briefly, our methods, we recently went on a project to better reflect our work towards those goals. We started by listing out all of our projects in a Google Sheets matrix. We added a column then for each of the SDGs. Next, we assigned a yes, no, or a 1-0 response based on multiple staff reviews. We defaulted to put goals 11 and 17, that's sustainable communities and partnerships for the goals, as a yes, because our model inherently addresses both of those on that yes, no scale. We conducted multiple staff reviews and then discussed any discrepancies between our reviews and ultimately used pivot tables to summarize those data and produce the data for these displays. So we were able to create some great displays and conversation starters, and we've also identified some future directions as a result, but there are some notable data quality limitations in this approach. First of all, this is goal level, right? And we're not getting into the indicators yet. This is a very preliminary assessment, right? We're looking for that yes, no. So it is also binary response, and the responses are non-exclusive. So a project can score yes on 1 SDG. It can also score yes on 15 SDGs. So we have a little bit of an issue in scale and the representations where we compare communities against each other. That said, we produced some pretty cool displays. So despite these limitations, the displays are very informative, and they do help to give that visual snapshot of the components of each of our community's profiles. While it's not necessarily comparing apples to apples because we are different sample sizes, you can see kind of how a community is allocating the projects under our partnership together. For future directions, we want to get into the indicator level and get a little bit more nitty gritty with it. Marshall has some cool stuff that he'll share about that. And we also want to beef up that student learning and assessment module, make it so that in the future our subjective evaluations are at least based on student work rather than our own internal. So with that, I am going to transition over to Dr. Gregory Broberg. It's my pleasure to introduce him. This is his third project working with us, and he developed the SDN reflection module with the School of Social Transformation, really one of the really strong faculty that we've had the pleasure to work with. Gregory?
Great. Good morning, and thank you, Steve. I'm Greg Broberg. I'm a professor in the School of Social Transformation on the Tempe campus. And before I begin, I want to reiterate our thanks to the conference organizers for creating a space for this presentation. I also want to thank Steve and our City of Peoria partners for their ongoing support. Without them and our other project work would simply not be possible. So first, my goal for the JUS 385 Justice in Everyday Life course was to engage students in real-world research methods, conducting focus group interviews, analyzing interview data, and reporting results. And the class of 100 students, both ASU online and in-person students, work together in teams to accomplish this goal. Slide. Actually, Steve, you can go back to that previous slide. Sorry about that. Students conducted a 1-hour focus group interview where they focused on 4 areas of needs associated with the pandemic. They were food, healthcare, housing, and employment. Each of these areas of need tied to one of or more than one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In addition to the interviews, participants were asked to complete a follow-up survey relating directly to the services provided by the City of Peoria Human Services Department. Slide. The significant findings from our interviews demonstrated a need to think more deeply about the vulnerable groups. For example, a change in employment created food needs, a gap in healthcare coverage, and housing insecurity. A common theme related to the lack of affordable housing resonates throughout Maricopa County. And finally, mental health issues that may not have been present before the pandemic became a key stressor in many aspects of delivering services and support. In the following slides, we can see how these findings connect with UN SDGs. Slide. So for goal number 1, no poverty, our interview participants shared content-rich accounts of how housing, food, and transportation insecurity force some into a deeper poverty level or move those who may not have experienced poverty before into that new particular area. In terms of food-related issues within goal number 2, slide, the pandemic created situations where previous food support mechanisms were not sufficient to address the needs of the homebound. Also, a lack of internet services to some populations created difficulties in signing up for WIC or other state or federal assistance programs. Slide. Disruptions in typical doctor visits for immunizations or general well-being checkups created impacts that can be seen within goal number 3, the good health and well-being. The risk of contracting COVID kept many at-risk families at home. More recently, we have seen new methods for addressing this issue in the distribution of COVID vaccines through small community-based pop-up clinics. Slide. Finally, as we mentioned earlier, a particular individual that was impacted in one way by the pandemic became subjected to other inequalities in other areas of need. The lack of affordable housing created stress on the existing shelter systems. This crossover effect in terms of multiple needs and multiple delivery mechanisms is one of the key areas that should be considered within all city, county, and state service delivery operations. And that ends my particular part of the presentation. Thank you, Steve, for moving those slides.
Great, thank you, Dr. Broberg. Clearly, this is reduced inequalities. That's my error, not his. But up next, it's my pleasure to introduce Marshall Curry. He's one of our partners in crime coordinating the EPIC and EPIC Network, a coalition of a national coalition of programs, much like SCN's Project Cities program. Marshall, take it away.
Thanks, Steve. Before I begin, I'll do a quick introduction of EPIC-N and what we do and how it relates to the presentation today. The Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities Network, or EPIC-N, is a nonprofit association with members all over the world. And Steve mentioned we're national. We started in the US, but we are starting to grow. Our organization and our members unite the human capital of universities with local governments and communities to improve the quality of life and social wealth for all involved, like the students who participate in Greg's class, as well as the local government officials here on the call today, as well as their residents that they're trying to support. As the program manager at EPIC-N, I work with all of our members, providing them support, helping our board of directors maintain the nonprofit as well. And on a daily basis, I'm speaking with Steve or others like him across the country, and again, the globe, to try and help improve their programming in all different aspects. And I want to talk a little bit about our history, because when we're thinking about how we're working on the SDGs and supporting our programs, our history is important to understand. EPIC-N formed as a voluntary informal group of university leaders in 2013 and began its first official year as a nonprofit in July of 2018. In a recent initiative to document each individual project completed by our member programs, our staff and some interns that were provided through the US EPA's virtual internship program completed a desktop analysis to sort the projects by the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as other frameworks. Following a commitment to improve our organization and our members' actions to be more anti-racist in practice, our board announced a formal adoption of the UN SDGs because so many of the goals focus on equity, quality, and a commitment to de-aggregate data on all of the other goals to make sure that those premises and initiatives are in focus so everyone is benefiting from sustainable development. Today, our network has over 60 programs all over the world, and we're publishing and building tools to help our programs better support communities' adoption of the SDGs, as Steve's doing here today and presenting on. This will take an exciting new level our supportive programs across the globe will take on a new exciting level as we kick off a second EPIC Asia workshop in April. We're hosting 30 pairs of university and local governments from about 10 or more countries, and we're really excited about that. The main event will be in May, but they've already begun some work. And what I'm really excited about in terms of our national efforts on the SDGs is that ASU in particular, and Project Cities is part of this network, but within the network, it's leading the adoption of the SDGs by universities in the support of community progress. A lot of universities are analyzing how their courses and their resources are identified by SDG, but what Steve and our local government leaders will present on, and Greg are doing, is they're tying it to the community's efforts and what actually goes on for residents in our local governments, which is where the work has to happen in order for us to reach a sustainable humanity, sustainable development. We're publishing tools to help track and evaluate those efforts. As I mentioned earlier, we're working to support all of our members in this. And from an analysis done last summer, we are getting fairly excited about how our programs like Project Cities can catalyze that local government effort. If you go to the next slide, Steve, you can see on the right that from that early effort, there's a really, we've had about 900 projects coded. So you'll see the scales a little bit different on our slide than on Steve's. And we've been able to represent that our projects from the EPIC network, from all the programs like Project Cities, are focusing in all the different SDGs. But we also had some problems with our methodology, and we have over 1,700 projects completed and only about 900 coded by SDG. So we know we have some work to do to get a better analysis of how our US efforts are going at localizing the SDG adoption and progress towards those SDGs. This year, in partnership with the EPA and other friends of our network, we're adopting a new keyword search methodology and pairing it with another new methodology, a self-assessment methodology, like the one Steve and Project Cities used for this presentation. We'll be pairing those two to help illuminate the complexity and intersectionality of sustainable development projects, as well as increase the rigor as we'll be developing that methodology to target the individual indicators of the SDGs, not the broad 1 through 17 goals. We hope this will provide our university and local government community leaders with better information as they track their individual projects. We hope it will improve their ability to track the community impact of those projects. And we've got some really interesting ways that we're going to do that. Obviously, some of it's still in development, so I can't explain too much about it as we're still figuring it out ourselves. But if you want to learn more about our work or how Project Cities is leading in our network, you can visit our website at the URL on the left there on the screen, or you can review the handout materials that Steve provided in the link. If you want to be a part of Project Cities organizational membership account and access some of the resources we're providing and stay in touch with us as we're publishing information about the methodology we're working on, feel free to reach out to Steve. There's other resources available, and I think if you're interested in supporting Steve's effort at ASU, or you're headed off to another university because you're a student and you want to start a Project Cities program there, feel free to reach out to Steve and he'll help you get connected. Thank you for having me today, and I'm just excited to be a part of this great panel. I'm extremely grateful for the contributions Steve, Gregory, Tracie, Jay, and all the other champions of Project Cities have made to our network, but also to those impacted by your efforts locally. With that, I'll summarize my overview of what we're working on nationally on how to support these programs. Thanks, Steve.
Great, thank you so much, Marshall. A very important part of our team. And up next, I'd like to introduce another very important part of our team. We're going to move into our community partners. These are the folks who turn that student work into real action. So I'm going to start off by introducing Jay Davies. He's the Chief of Staff with the City Manager's Office at the City of Peoria. And he'll talk a little bit about some of the initial work that he and his sustainability team are doing to start conceptualizing the SDGs and how they play out in their strategic plan. Jay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so Peoria and myself, for that matter, we're relatively new to the concept of the United Nations SDGs. We did come to our Project Cities partnership through our sustainability manager. And while our projects cover a wide array of municipal interests, this partnership was created out of a sustainability focus. And sometimes that gets lost. I'm sure mostly on my side, on the municipal partner side. So as I've become more familiar with the SDGs, what struck me immediately was how broad and comprehensive they were. Obviously, they go far beyond at least my original narrow perspective on sustainability, recycling and alternative energy sources. That said, to be honest, we're approaching the SDGs with some trepidation, with some hesitation. Perhaps because they are so all-encompassing and we are the government, this is going to be a slow walk for us. We have a lot of stakeholders where these are concerned, both internal and external, that need to be part of the conversation. So that need and desire for engagement really slows things down for us. But any hesitancy is not out of disagreement or lack of congruence, but rather the scope and complexity of the goals. This is definitely an elephant-eating type of process for us. At this point, we are focusing on the internal and in fact haven't outwardly depicted how the SDGs correlate with our current sustainability plan. We have mapped the SDGs to our own goals as an internal exercise, And that shows that we're in alignment on most of them, if not all of them. And I think with some additional exploration, we could hit them all for sure. So while we feel we're just putting our toe in the water here, I'm told that we're in a good place and in good company, even if at this early stage. Nonetheless, we look forward to advancing our efforts under each of the SDGs, which I'm confident will be made better because of our partnership with ASU. That concludes my piece of this, and thanks for having me. I'm honored to be part of this panel.
Great, thank you, Jay. And just as he said, there's stages to this process, and I think one of the really exciting parts about this type of partnership is our opportunity to kind of work together and figure out what that looks like. So as part of our exercise in looking at Peoria's portfolio, we were able to pick out some of the top areas that we've been doing really well on. They do seem to align with some of our high-level program goals, and you'll see some synergy too with some of the work with the town of Clarkdale. Thank you, Jay. It's my pleasure now to introduce Tracie Hlvanika, who is the town manager with the town of Clarkdale, to talk a little bit about some past efforts, their perspectives on the partnership, and some realization that they were already doing this work. Tracie?
Thank you, Steve, and it's a pleasure to be here with everybody, and I really appreciate all that we have been able to not only accomplish, but work collaboratively with the EPICs and the Sustainable Cities. And we too in Clarkdale feel a lot like Peoria. It was an unknown concept to us, but one that when we actually had an opportunity to do our research and look at how these types of goals are actually embedded within everyday life, that it became pretty obvious to us that these things were things that we needed as a community and a municipality to try to see how we can make them more not only visual to everybody in our community, but also be something that our entire organization was working towards. So we have had past experiences with Sustainable Cities, and we are one of those that really had an opportunity to do a lot of participation meetings and get to the bottom of some of the things that our residents were trying to work on, and found out later in the process how they directly related to what is going on with these SDGs. So after some time, we in Clarkdale decided that we would work this in to what is actually a living document for our community. Next slide, please. So one of the things that our town council decided to do was put together a work plan document that actually encompassed some of these goals, but instead of using them directly as SDG goals, we put them under the same goals that our local community had already examined and voted upon. So it actually worked really well to show that the marriage between what is going on with the SDGs and what is actually going on in municipal government are all encompassing in one and the same. One of the things that we worked directly with ASU and their Sustainable Cities project was a sustainable park. And most of us, when we're thinking about sustainability, we think about the ecological side, which Jay so eloquently pointed on, that sometimes it's not just that. And it's more about how your environment and your community is actually overcoming some of the things that are not visible every day to everyone. So our sustainability park really took great life, and we're really pleased with the way that happened. Getting a project and a plan in place, but to kind of catapult off of that, this last time we were able to actually do a couple of other things that really help with talking about some of the equity and other sustaining goals that are really happening to everybody in a lot of communities. Those were broadband, obviously, and with Gregory's comments about COVID, that's one of those things that came out explicitly to everybody. And so we put that as one of our work plan goals, that we would try to see how we can bridge that gap for rural communities. We are working very close with EPIC and ASU with the students to work on some projects, both short-term and long-term, but their main focus was to see how they could assist with our students in our schools getting internet while they were doing remote learning. The next was affordable housing, and that is a big one for a lot of reasons, but that affordable housing for us is really important so that we can live, work, and play in Clarkdale. And that living in Clarkdale is something that a lot of our local employees cannot do, whether it is municipal, whether it is our teachers, or just our industry workers with some of the businesses that we have. And so that made it on their work plan, and also is a direct correlation to the SDGs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, our sustainability part, that is kind of twofold. It is working to make sure that not only are we trying to help with how we impact our environment, but we're also trying to take some of that burden off of the environment and using energy to create opportunities to give incentives for people to come to our industrial park. And so we're hoping that those types of things will definitely kind of bridge the gap, and people can see where there's a benefit, and it's not just the old-fashioned way of recycling and doing things. So for our town council and our employees, even though they are not working directly with the 17 goals, they are very aware of how these goals are in correlation, and did a concerted effort when they put the work plan together. So our work plan will be adopted in a couple of weeks with our council, and we are glad to say that these things are really highlighted as priorities. So we're looking forward to how we will mark and metric those. Marshall, you'll be hearing a lot from me probably as we move forward. But having said that, we're real fortunate to have a council that is willing to take on something like this, because it isn't as obvious to them at how they do those things. And so we're looking forward to any way that we can be a part of this, because we feel like it's really important. And then on top of that, one of the things that my council decided after looking at their work plan was there was an item that they need to have a conversation about, which deals with equity. And so we will be doing that soon. And they are actually doing that, one, in an effort for the SDGs, but another because of the community. And so again, we see how those things marry together, and it's not always that you can think that is one of those 17, but when you look back, it somehow fits within those, and we're really proud that we are being a part of that. So that concludes my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tracie. Picking up on one common theme between both of our community partners here, sustainability is more than just recycling and cleaning up the air, right? And I think that's one of the really great parts about using this framework is tying it together. And as both of our community partners alluded to, this work is already happening. This work is already happening, and we just need to make the connections.